I heard the words and they landed like a stone. Why is she even still alive? Those 6 words changed everything for me. I had gone to my son's house that afternoon like I had many times before. I carried a small plate, a simple tray of sweets, nothing more than the instinct to be helpful, to belong. I sat in the backyard where the light was soft and voices faded into the hum of ordinary life. Then the sentence came, casual and cruel, spoken as if it were fact rather than an insult. I did not react outwardly. For years I had lived with a gentle assumption that my sacrifices, my patience, my quiet presence meant I would be treated with respect. I had given my time, my energy, my trust. I thought family would be a safe place. That belief was not navet, it was faith. Faith that the people who knew me best would not erase me with a careless phrase. After I heard that line, the first thing I did was listen to myself. Not the self that had learned to minimize needs and swallow hurt, but the small, honest voice that asked, "Is this how you want to be seen? Is this how you will allow your life to be defined?" I decided then and there to stop being silent about myself. I started with facts. I went home and I opened the drawers I had avoided. I read papers with a clear, deliberate attention I had never practiced before. Names, dates, accounts, signatures, nothing mystical, just the reality of where my name sat and where decisions had been made without my consent. As I read, anger arrived not as a shout but as clarity. Things had been moving around me, and I had allowed them because it felt easier than conflict. The easier road had cost me pieces of ownership over my own life. I made a list, not a long one. Each line held a single, practical item. Check bank records, confirm ownership documents, consult with someone who could translate legal words into meaning. I sought advice from a person who understood paperwork and law in plain language. I asked questions I had been taught not to ask because they might make others uncomfortable. Asking those questions felt like practicing a new muscle. When I discovered that decisions had been made without my full knowledge, I did not scream or strike back in revenge. I changed things. I corrected names. I updated accounts. I reclaimed what belonged to me quietly and deliberately. Each small correction felt like a stitch in a wound closing. It was not about punishment. It was about making sure my life reflected my choices. I also made space for grief. There is a grief that comes from the simple recognition that people you trusted have let you down. That grief is not dramatic. It is steady and patient. I allowed it. I let myself sit with the embarrassment, with the shame that had been handed to me like a cloak. I did not wear it. I looked at it, set it down, and walked away. That is a brave act to notice hurt and then refuse to turn it into identity. After the paperwork, I turned to the house. I realized that the place where I lived had an influence on how I felt. My home was filled with things that belonged to others' expectations more than to my comfort. I decided to simplify. I found a smaller space, a place that needed less maintenance and offered more peace. It is not the size of the house that matters. It is the feeling inside it. The new place gave me mornings where the light reached me first, evenings where I could read without interruption, and a kitchen where I could make tea for myself without apology. With the change in my living situation came a quiet revolution in my daily life. I began to pay attention to small pleasures I had forgotten, the exact thickness of tea I liked, the way sunlight warmed the corner of a chair, a song that made me breathe differently. I cultivated little rituals that belonged only to me. They were not acts of rebellion. They were acts of homecoming. I also restructured my relationships. The word no had felt dangerous in my mouth for a long time. Saying it had been equated with being unkind or selfish. But boundaries are not cruelty. They are a map. Here is whom I will allow to cross, And here is where I stop and step back. When I spoke to my son about what had been said, I did so calmly and with firmness. I explained how those words landed on me. I did not accuse in a way that demanded a fight. I described my feelings and the consequences. I would no longer accept being dismissed, and I would not allow my dignity to be a negotiable thing. People can surprise you. Some responded with regret and changed behavior. Others were indifferent or defensive. That was their choice. Boundaries revealed who was willing to grow and who preferred the status quo. I accepted that some relationships would shift. Loss is part of gaining self-respect. It is a paradox. When you stop giving your presence away to those who belittle you, you lose people and you also gain yourself. I gave away things too. I donated to a shelter that supports women who are rebuilding. That donation was not a grand gesture meant to signal virtue. It was a practical act of solidarity. I had carried shame in private. I wanted to convert that shame into something useful. If my pain could help another woman find a place to sleep or a legal consultation she could not otherwise afford, then the hurt had led to a purpose beyond my suffering. Healing does not happen in a single moment. It arrives again and again, in small acts and consistent choices. I began to cultivate new friendships, not many, but ones that did not require me to disappear. I learned to accept help when it was offered without strings. I practiced asking for what I needed: a ride to a clinic, a listening hour with a neighbor, a recommendation for someone who could help me with forms. Asking was not a weakness. It was an exercise in belonging that did not depend on self-erasure. I also reconnected with who I had been before being diminished by the roles people assigned to me. There was a woman who loved books in a language I had set aside. There was a person who liked to walk at dawn. I reintroduced myself to those parts, gently and without hurry. Small joys anchored me. They were steadying points that reminded me it was possible to feel whole again. There were times when the memory of that phrase made me feel like retreating. It is natural to want to hide when you are hurt, but I learned that retreating into silence only gives the hurt more room to live. Speaking my truth, even quietly, took away its power. I shared pieces of my story with people who listened. I discovered that my story was not just about humiliation. It was about the courage to shift course and the dignity of everyday decisions. If you have ever been in a place where someone's words made you feel less than human, know this: you are not defined by their careless language. Your life is not a sentence for others to decide. You have the right to examine your affairs, to set your terms, and to live where you feel safe. You have the right to rearrange your life so that your dignity is not on loan. Practically speaking, if you find yourself in a similar situation, start with small concrete steps. Look at your documents. Know where your name appears and what decisions are linked to it. Speak to someone who understands those papers. Protect your financial autonomy in ways that feel manageable. Make a list of actions that do not require grand confrontation, just steady, meaningful work. Find one person who can be an ally, someone who will listen without judgment. Choosing less clutter, less noise, less expectation is not failure. Over time, my anger softened into resolve, and my resolve softened into a gentle confidence. The cruelty I witnessed did not break me. It taught me how to be careful with where I put my trust and fierce about protecting my dignity. I did not become bitter. I became practical, clear, and quietly strong. I thought I was being selfish because I refused to be complicit in my own belittlement. That guilt taught me something important. Guilt is often the voice of old expectations. When you act to preserve your integrity, you are making space for truth. Now, when I hear people speak thoughtlessly, I remember only to choose how I respond. I do not allow their words to map onto my self-worth. I choose to invest in things that sustain me, friendships that honor me, routines that nourish me, and activities that restore me. To anyone listening who needs permission to change course, here it is. You may choose a different path. You may downsize your possessions, upsize your peace, and reorganize your days so that they reflect what you value. Sit down with a pen and write 3 things you can do this week for yourself. Make 1 call that will give you information. Move 1 small piece of furniture. Clean 1 drawer. Or take a walk at a time of day that feels like yours. Each of these acts is a vote for a different future. The rest will fall away. And that is not a failure, it is pruning. Trees do not mourn every fallen leaf. They prepare for new growth. I reclaimed legal papers, moved to a home that belonged to my rhythm, donated what I could spare to help others. They are full of mornings that start with my own music and nights that end with a book I picked because I wanted to read it. If you are carrying a memory like the one I had, a phrase that played in your mind and made you small, remember this. The phrase was an accident of another person's heartlessness. You can respond with small, steady actions that rebuild a life around you. I did not erase the past. I learned from it. I honored the sorrow. I used it to sharpen what I would no longer accept. And in doing so, I found a gentler strength than I had known before. If you write to tell me what you did that was small but brave, I will read it. If you choose to act and to protect your dignity, then you are doing the most important work there is, keeping yourself whole. You are allowed to protect your life. You are allowed to live where you are respected. You are allowed to make choices that make your days better. I chose mine. You may choose yours.